Today, we're going to talk about colors of money and exactly why they might be important for you to understand as you are working to bring products and services to government customers. So, first off, what is color of money? What does that mean? It's essentially a way the DoD refers to an appropriation. So, when the Congress approves and authorizes funding in different categories, it is then sent to the various DoD services and agencies who will then execute the funding. In order for them to be doing that lawfully, they must execute the funding in alignment with what it was approved and authorized for by Congress. There's a lot of different types of colors of money out there, but typically the primary ones you'll see are O&M, RDT&E, and procurement. So what all does that mean? I'll break it down here a little bit. So O&M is probably one of the more primary colors of money, and it stands for operations and maintenance. This is funding that's essentially the pot that goes towards keeping the lights on, funding daily operations on base, maybe funding things like sustainment tails for various programs and systems, software as a service, licenses, training, education, and travel. And it's also 1 year money, which means that it can only be obligated in a 1 year period of time or in one fiscal year. The next most common is RDT&E, or research, development, testing, and evaluation, sometimes just simply called R&D, depending on the service or agency you're working with. This pretty much implies in the name what it is. So it's money that's used for testing operations. It could be for testing new weapon systems or live fire or anything that's going towards looking at new capabilities and helping prove out those as potential future solutions. The difference with RDT&E funding, other than the scope of it, is that it's also 2 year money, meaning it must be obligated over the course of 2 years instead of one. So that provides a little bit more flexibility for the timing of when RDT&E funding can be obligated. And lastly, probably the third most common rather would be procurement. The money is used to fund the procurement of systems, think satellites or missiles or these large purchases. So this is going to be beyond O&M, beyond the scope of R&D, because now you're buying an entire system that is delivering a new capability. Procurement funding is actually 3 year money, which means that, again, you can obligate it over the course of 3 years. There's some flexibility baked into that, knowing that purchasing large weapon systems isn't always a one-time click of the button. There's various schedules and phases for all these different weapon systems rolling out. And so the funding is aligned to do so and match that. So in summary, different colors of money are simply mechanisms or safeguards to ensure that the funding appropriated by Congress is being spent for its intended purpose. And this is primarily not only to make sure that the money is being put in the right mission, but also to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, and essentially deliver the highest ROI for the taxpayer. And then when you're looking at all these appropriations, it's very important to consider the difference against what is also called purpose, time, and amount. So Congress will call out what purpose, time, and amount means. So purpose refers to the actual specified reason expenditures have been authorized. So that means spending money for the reason that Congress approved it and authorized it. Time refers to the period in which funding is available. As an example, O&M funding is only available for 1 year. So you have to obligate and spend that money in that year. And then lastly, amount refers to the maximum amount of funding available to obligate. You never want to exceed the amount of funding that you have been given in order to spend. That's a big no-no, which leads into some examples of what are some things you should stay away from doing. Well, one example would be using fiscal year 25 O&M funding to buy a fiscal year 26 requirement. That's a big no-no. Another example would be using procurement funding to pay for something like a training course. Obviously, procurement should be buying large systems or weapon systems or hardware and shouldn't necessarily ever be used to buy a training course. And then lastly, obligating more funding than available is the last big no-no. Think of a program that's got $1 million budget for a requirement, but they obligate a $1.1 million bill. That's a big problem, and that actually can lead to what's called an Anti-Deficiency Act or an ADA violation, which are definitely not fun and not a place that you or your government sponsor want to be in. And lastly, there are some safeguards for all these things. There's many different players, offices, and automated systems in place to help track everything related to the colors of money and what they're being used for, the purpose, time, and amount violations. And they're all aimed at preventing that. And ultimately, knowing your way around discussing colors of money, it's really going to make you more credible talking to a government customer. And it's also going to help you understand where exactly your product or service fits in alignment with the various appropriations being approved by Congress. In this video, I only discussed the most common, which was O&M, RDT&E, and procurement, but there's certainly many other different types of appropriations or colors of money. And if you are interested in learning more, there's a lot of great resources out online. And then our team at Long Capture here would be happy to chat if you have any very specific questions. Thank you.